So today we'll be looking at some Bitcoin cycle targets, mainly from a time perspective. This will be about estimating a ballpark period where a cycle top for Bitcoin could be expected, assuming that the 70k high that we've seen was not the cycle high. So there's no way of knowing for sure when or at what price Bitcoin will actually peak, but a general idea can help navigate the cryptocurrency market better. Our first metric will be looking at the bars since the cycle bottom. So for this first cycle, you can see that from the low to the high was approximately 110 days. For the second cycle, using the first low to the high, 150 days. However, we can also consider this retest as a potential point that we can drag our dates out from, and this one actually gives 122 days. For the third cycle, from the low to the high, you can see again 152 days, which is similar to the cycle before that one. If we consider this first peak to be the high, which is what seemed to be suggested by many indicators, we can see that it's 120 days, which is similar to this second date range on the previous cycle. So if we apply these to the current cycle from the low to, if we drag out 120 days, that would sort of suggest a early sort of boundary for Bitcoin peaking of March 25. If we look at the longer date ranges here, 150 days-ish, that would sort of put a potential high out in September to October of 25. So that's going to be our first sort of target. So if we put some vertical lines here, we can sort of visualize that better. Our second metric, we'll be looking at the bars since the halving events for Bitcoin. So if we take our date range again, from the halving to the high, and see it was about 52 days. For our second cycle, halving to the high, 74 days, bars, 72 bars and 52 bars. And for our third cycle, from the halving to the high, you can see about 70 days, which is similar to the first, to the previous cycle. So this gives us a range between 50 to 70 days. We can also add this first peak out of curiosity, and that's also 50 days. It gives us a range between about 50 to 80 days from the halving event till the Bitcoin peak. So if we take these out, about 50 and 70 to 80 days, these values come in very similar to the ones we found with the previous metric, which is starting to really support the idea of a Bitcoin peak, likely in 2025, more so towards the end of the year. Our third metric will be looking at the days, the bars since, well, from one peak to the next. So in this first cycle, from one peak to the next, it took about 130 bars. From this peak to the next peak was 200 bars, and from the peak in 2017 to the 2021 peak, it seems to be about 200 days as well. So this gives us 130, 120, 120. Gives us a brief idea. If we apply these on to the current numbers, 120 days, I don't think we're going to see that again. I'm just going to assume it's going to be 200 days like the previous two cycles. 200 days puts us again right in between our values here, which really supports the idea that a Bitcoin peak this early on in the cycle would be quite unusual. Our fourth metric that we'll be looking at is the Bitcoin wave bands, which were developed by Leo here on LinkedIn. which is basically just looking at a regression model for Bitcoin and adding some waves onto the top. And this model has, well, the price of Bitcoin has respected this model for quite some time, and it seems to suggest a peak again in the area that we've been looking at, which is roughly second quarter of 2025 to fourth quarter of 2025. Our final model will be, final metric, we'll be looking at the bars since Bitcoin puts in a new all-time high. So to look at that, we'll be again using our date range tool. Bitcoin high seemed to be around, well, it was here, put in a new all-time high here from, this is getting very messy, apologize for that. So from Bitcoin putting in a new all-time high to the cycle high took approximately 40 bars. For the second cycle here, from the high, you can see that it put in a new all-time high here. So from here to the cycle high was again about 40 days. I'm going to circle these to make them easier to see. 40 bars, and if we look at the third cycle, Bitcoin puts in a new all-time high here. So from here to the cycle high was approximately 49 days. Again, I'll circle that just so we can tell them apart, because this is becoming very messy. So the numbers here seem to suggest approximately 40 to 50 bars from putting in a new all-time high. Bitcoin will put in its cycle high. If we apply this onto current numbers, Bitcoin put in a new all-time high in March of 2024, and 40 days from that will put us in December of this year. And if we assume that it's going to be close to 50 like the previous cycle, this would put us out in March of 2025, which is sort of our lower bound here. So looking at these metrics, they seem to suggest that a cycle peak would be sort of expected between January 25 and September to December 25. So it gives us quite a wide range, but if the Bitcoin price starts to rally up high within this sort of time frame here, I think taking some profits off the table could be a smart idea. There are, however, multiple considerations to take into account, mainly that this is extrapolation at its best. We're just using previous price action to sort of guess what's going to happen in the future. And these all sort of align with cycle theory, which cannot technically continue to manifest itself forever. Eventually, the cryptocurrency market will shift to a more noisy and random behavior due to alpha decay. And this approach also discounts any sort of macro events. With all the interest rates and inflation talks, macroeconomic data could affect the market and could shift the peak earlier or later on in the future. There has been quite a bit of talk recently about a left translated cycle, and I suppose this could be a peak in that case, although it would be quite a underwhelming peak. So that's about it. This is my estimates for the cycle. So a general area for a peak would be 2025